for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today on the show, we've got a special treat. Mark Miller. He is the Wall Street Journal and international best-selling author, communicator, and the former vice president of high-performance leadership at Chick-fil-A. Today, Mark serves as the co-founder of Lead Every Day, an extension of his life-inspired mission to encourage and equip leaders with the tools that they need to be successful. He's a leadership expert and a seasoned author with over 1 million books in print in more than 25 languages. On the show today, Mark and I talk about his pathway to becoming a leadership expert and his most recent book, Uncommon Greatness, 5 Fundamentals to Transform Your Leadership. We talk about the number one challenge facing leaders globally, why greatness should not be our goal as leaders, how do leaders build followership, and so much more. I can't even list it all. So you're not going to want to miss this episode with Mark Miller. Mark, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
I know when we last talked, we talked about your love of photography and the fact that you've been a photographer for 40 years. I think I got that right.
Close to 45 now.
Wow. Okay. What keeps you hooked?
I think, and that was a good question. I think I'm a storyteller at heart, and photography gives me another medium to be a storyteller. And I think that's the way I approach everything I shoot, even if it's my grandson's birthday. Okay, how can I tell this story? And so, I don't know, I've loved it from the beginning, and I continue to pick up a camera.
I love that. And it's something you can do everywhere, right? Like it's literally something that travels with you. I've always been jealous of runners because you travel a lot. I imagine you yourself, and all they have to take is a pair of sneakers and shorts, right? Maybe I need to pick up photography because at least to get me active, but all I have to take is a camera.
Here's the interesting thing. The phones have gotten so good. I take a lot of pictures with my phone. And now the real photographers in the world will go, are you serious? Yeah, I've got some really good images. In fact, I met with a guy yesterday who I had encouraged to take more pictures. And I told him, I said, the best camera in the world is the one you have with you. And he actually showed me some stunning images, and he shot them with his phone.
Yes.
And I said, there you go. There you go.
I love it. We're not here to talk about photography. We want to talk about leadership. I'm curious, what was your path to becoming an expert in leadership? And let's talk a little bit about where you got your start.
It was not a ladder. It was a little bit more of a climbing wall, right? There was no strategic intent per se on my part. In fact, I started 45 years ago in a local Chick-fil-A restaurant. I'll make this brief. It's a very long story. I was a team member, an hourly team member, and I was awful. I was so bad, I felt like I was going to be fired any day. And I couldn't handle the pressure. So I made a strategic career decision, which I'm always quick to say, this is not advice. I quit because I felt like it'd be better to leave than to have to explain the rest of my life why I got fired at Chick-fil-A. So I did. I quit. And I went and got another job. And 6 months later, I got laid off. And I thought, shoot, I need a job. And I can't really do what they do in the restaurant. I'm just not good with my hands. And I'm slow. And you don't need that in the quick service industry. So that was a bad combination. And so I thought, hey, maybe I could work at their corporate headquarters. Now, this makes no sense to anyone in any universe. I chalk it up to the mind of a child. This was 45 years ago. So I walked into the corporate office and said, hey, I'd like a job working in your warehouse. The receptionist told me to have a seat. And just a few minutes later, Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, came out, took me into his office to conduct the interview. And for those that don't know that name, he's actually the guy who invented the chicken sandwich. So that probably doesn't make sense to your listeners. That didn't make sense to me as a kid. I'm thinking, I know who he is. Why is he interviewing me? I didn't learn that day, but I later learned he only had 15 corporate employees. at that point in history.
Wow.
And if you've got such a small team, it makes a little more sense for the head man or the head woman to be conducting those interviews. And so looking back, I tell people I think it was a combination of God's grace and lack of discernment on Truett's part that he gave me that job working in the warehouse. And I also got to work in the mailroom because there were only 16 of us. And so I got to wear those two hats. And that started a 44 and a half year career, really just trying to add value and serve at the pleasure of the organization. They asked me to start several functions and departments over the course of my career. In the early days, I don't think it had anything to do with my talent, skills, or giftedness. I think it was a little bit of let the kid do it, and I'd do anything. I started our corporate communications group. I don't really remember. I was either 19 or had just turned 20. I was still going to school at night trying to finish my education, and I started corporate communication because they decided there was a need and I would do it.
Right.
And so it's really been about serving and trying to add value. I never asked for any of the roles that I had at the home office. Yeah, I did. One quick sidebar. One time I was approached by our president. Now, he may have been executive vice president at the time. This was a long time ago, but he was one of our top senior leaders.
Right.
And he asked me if I wanted to actually move into the marketing department. And there was a person leaving, and he wanted me to be responsible for national marketing and advertising. And he said, would you be interested in doing this? And I said, you've got something I'll never have, and that's perspective. I said, you can see the whole business. You were Truett's third employee. I said, here's what I'd love for you to do. I want you to project 5 years into the future and imagine me on the path I'm on or the marketing path. And you tell me on which of those paths do you think I'll add the most value? And that's where I want to work.
Right. Wow.
And he looked at me and he said, let me get back to you. So 3 days later, he called me and he said, you're going to stay in operations. And so I did, not for my entire career, but he decided that for that next season, I could add more value where I was. And so, again, just trying to add value, keep learning, keep growing. And here you are 45 years later.
I mean, that's an insightful question to ask somebody that wants you to take a new job, right? That's pretty insightful in and of itself.
Again, I would have done either because even though I was only maybe not even halfway into my career, I probably had 15 years under my belt. And again, my bias was I want to add value and I want to serve. And I said, you can figure out that better than I can.
Right.
I hope he could. And again, we'll just trust that he made the right decision. But again, I would never have the perspective of certainly at that point in my career, and maybe never have the perspective of that senior leader. And I wanted him to help really guide my career without asking him directly, guide my career. Because it really was born out of a heart to serve the organization.
I love that. I love it. At what point in time did it flip a bit to be focused on leadership itself and coaching other leaders, if you will?
All right. About 25 years ago, almost exactly, maybe 26 years ago, we had a problem. We didn't have enough leaders. And I don't know if any of your listeners have ever been there. It's not really a good place to be because in my experience, when you have a problem to solve or an opportunity to seize, you put a leader on it. Now, he or she will most likely not single-handedly resolve that, but they'll put a team together and they'll cobble together the resources and they'll cast the vision and they'll actually solve the problem or seize the opportunity. When you don't have leaders ready, you give those problems and opportunities to existing leaders, which in the short works really well, but long term, it's a recipe for disaster, right? At some point, you'll destroy your existing leadership capacity. Right. Yep. And so our executive committee realized that we needed to address this, and they asked me to figure it out. They said, we want you to figure out how to accelerate leadership development. Now, I'll just, again, another quick sidebar. At that point, we had never, that I'm aware of, consciously thought about leadership development. It was more a process, I'll put that in air quotes, of immersion and osmosis.
Gotcha.
And people just paid attention. That's how I learned to lead. I just paid attention. I asked questions. I took good notes. And when you have proximity to great leaders, you can actually do that. But as the business was growing, our growth was outpacing that approach to leadership development. And so I put together a team of really smart people and I said, hey, guess what we get to do? We get to figure out how to accelerate leadership development. And that work, which was done about 25 years ago, actually became my first book that I co-authored with a guy named Ken Blanchard. Some of your audience may know that name. Back in the day, I guess in that season of his career, he had 3 books on the bestseller list at one time, which is hard to do.
Yeah.
And he actually approached me. He knew of the work we had done at Chick-fil-A, and he said, hey, this has got to be a book. And I blew him off. And I know Ken and knew him back then. And I said, hey, Ken, everything looks like a book to you, which is why he sold about 70 million books.
Right.
And he said, no, he said, you were trying to articulate what great leaders do at Chick-fil-A. He said, what you and your team have done, you have articulated what great leaders have done throughout history.
Wow.
And it's got to be a book. And that became our first book called The Secret. And it's now in 25 languages or so. So it's done quite well. So that was probably that defining moment when we said, hey, there's real value in having a teachable point of view.
Right.
And so we then began to look for near-term, mid-term, and emerging challenges that we felt like our leaders were going to face and leaders globally would face.
Right.
And then we tried to get ahead of those. And the new book is the 12th of those projects over the last 25 years.
I love it. Congratulations on the new book. It's Uncommon Greatness, 5 Fundamentals to Transform Your Leadership. Tell me about the book. Like, why this book? Why now?
There's a long backstory. Again, I'll give it to you as succinctly as possible.
Sure.
We think this book is essential to try and combat the global challenge. There is I need the right word here. There's a crisis globally in the leadership space. We did a survey while working on that book and talked to thousands of leaders from around the world. And a third of them said they don't have enough leaders today.
Yeah.
And 50% of them said they don't think they're going to solve this problem, which is another story for another day.
Right.
That broke my heart because if leaders don't solve this problem, it will not solve itself. And for leaders to basically forfeit their agency, again, that's another podcast for another day.
Right.
But what we have learned and what we believe to be true and where we started 25 years ago, if you don't have a common definition of leadership, your chances of creating a leadership culture is almost zero. And now I would argue that there's something every organization needs more than leadership. You need a leadership culture, which is a place where leaders are routinely and systematically developed. It's just what you do. And you have a surplus. So you don't find yourself in the situation we were in 25 years ago. We looked at our leadership bench and said, oh. And so this book is the cornerstone for organizations that want to try and tackle this problem.
Yeah. I will add, not that you need more stats to this.
No, I love stats.
But like I did a survey with CMOs, chief marketing officers, probably a few years ago. And 60% of the people, I think it was a little over 60%, said, I don't have anyone in my organization that could step into my role. And so you got this same leadership crisis that you're seeing with the data in your book, we've seen in the marketing function as well. And we didn't ask that second question, which is a very important question. Are you going to solve this? But my charge to CMOs is you've got to solve it, right? There's no one else that's going to solve this problem for you. You've got to your point, take agency over the.
I think the guy's name was Hans Fritz. I hope I've got that right. He made a statement 25 years ago, there is no success without a successor. I think that's a powerful concept.
That is. Yes.
I think it's powerful. And here's the other thing. If you're preparing a successor, that doesn't mean you have to die, get hit by a bus, or retire. What it may mean is your organization is going to grow. And if it's going to grow, you're going to need more leadership capacity.
Yes.
Because you cannot outgrow your leadership capacity.
Yeah. It's the notion, you're hitting on it, which is the philosophy of abundance versus scarcity.
Yeah.
Like, I will have more. If I do the right things, the pie will get bigger.
Yeah. So let me, just a quick, since you mentioned that, when Ken Blanchard approached me about doing this book, I went to our executive committee and I said, Ken Blanchard has this crazy idea. And I thought it was a crazy idea, but I respected Ken. So I took the question up the flagpole. And our executive committee came back with what I think is one of the best examples of an abundance mentality I've ever heard. They said, we think you should do the book. Maybe it will serve the world.
Wow.
Not knowing, none of us knew. It was going to end up in 25 languages.
Yeah.
And by the way, not because it's that great a book, but because it's full of truth and truth travels. And that's the last piece of your question about why this book, why now. This is a refresh in many ways of that first work we did 25 years ago. The difference, there are a couple of fundamental differences, since we're going to talk about the fundamentals.
Yeah.
One difference is that first book, because I partnered with Ken, we did it as a parable, a business fable. This is a traditional business book with stats, case studies, so forth and so on. So the organization wanted that. And then the other reason is that our fifth fundamental, when we first published it almost 2 decades ago, it was a separate book altogether. And so the organization said, we need all this in one book, as opposed to folks having to read 2 books to understand our point of view. That was the more short-term, pragmatic reason to redo those fundamentals and to publish Uncommon Greatness.
I love it. Let's talk about what you're finding as the number one challenge leaders are facing right now globally.
Interestingly enough, I think it's not just leaders. I think this is going to apply to your marketing professionals, whether they're in leadership positions or not. Now, they can decide. But here's my answer to that. I don't know if it would surprise you or not. And it's really a challenge of leadership effectiveness. We did some work several years ago. I said, we're always trying to figure out what are those emerging threats, challenges, barriers, or opportunities. And sometimes they're closer than we would like, right? They're almost imminent challenges. And we observed a lot of leaders, and I would say a lot of professionals, to include your audience specifically, again, regardless of whether they're in a position of leadership or not. But we saw a lot of leaders who we felt knew how to lead, but they weren't leading well. And they would admit they weren't leading well. And so we said, let's tackle this. Let's see if we can help them. And we internally branded it as a question of effectiveness. I describe it like a major league pitcher who's having trouble throwing strikes. He doesn't need to learn to pitch. He's already in the big leagues. He's got the contract. He's on the team, but he's got to make some adjustments because he's got to throw more strikes.
Right.
And we did some work on leadership effectiveness, and we determined the number one culprit is what we call quicksand. And it's a toxic mix, and it varies from person to person, and it varies even in seasons of our lives. But think of it as anything that impedes your effectiveness. Some of the usual suspects are things like busyness, complexity, distractions, resource scarcity, fear, fatigue, and maybe in some cases, even success. Because we're too scared to let go of what we've got in pursuit of something that might be better.
Right.
And so I think that's still the number one challenge. I just meet too many leaders that know what to do and they just can't do it.
Right.
Because of all this other stuff. It's impossible to lead well over time in quicksand. You just can't do it. We published that work in a book called Smart Leadership.
Gotcha. I love that. Well,
Yeah.
One of the things I think it's in the current book is you talk about greatness is not the goal.
Right.
You got to help me with that one.
All right. Okay. Greatness is not a bad thing. So we're taking this out of a little bit of a larger context. But I would argue that greatness is not the highest bar. It's not the pinnacle. And I know too many men and women who objectively, you might say they've done this and this. They have achieved some level of personal or professional greatness. And they're miserable. They're miserable.
Yes.
I think common greatness is always going to be a shallow victory because it's about you. It's fleeting. It hinges on the applause and accolades of others. And the world is fickle, and you can be a hero today and a goat tomorrow and be fundamentally the same person, right?
Right.
And so we said, we think there's a higher bar. We've called it uncommon greatness. And that is when your focus becomes eliciting greatness from others. It's an attitude and perspective shift. Oh, by the way, it may not be noticed like common greatness. You may not get the accolades and the applause, but it's going to create joy. It's going to create fulfillment. It's going to create satisfaction. It's going to create higher levels of success over time. And it's lasting. It will actually outlast you. And the premise of the book is the only way to shift from the pursuit of common greatness to uncommon greatness is uncommon leadership. And the book is about the 5 fundamentals to help leaders really make that leap and shift their focus and priorities.
As you describe it, I don't know if this is natural to feel this way, but I start to smile. I start to think about people that I've helped along their journey to do better work, to do higher performance. And it does bring this like warm feeling to you that you're like, yeah, yes, I'll use the podcast as an example. Podcast is relatively successful, but it's those experiences with those people that are much more intrinsically valuable to me. Anyway, it's weird. As you started to talk about it, I started to feel that warmth coming through.
I saw you smiling.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Hey, I think this man is pursuing uncommon greatness.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I try.
That's all we. That is the. It's the effort. It's the journey. That's what. Yeah, the trying transforms us.
Right.
Not the destination.
I love that. One of the things I think leaders are a sign of success, maybe. I don't know if I'm thinking about this right, but the notion of to lead, you have to have followers, right? And to be a leader, you have to be inspiring other people. So like, how do you advise leaders on, building followership?
Our picture of leadership is an iceberg. And I don't know if your listeners will remember this or not. I had to be reminded that it was 5th grade when I probably studied icebergs. Those memories are long gone, but that's what I've been told. And you may recall the fact that about 10% of the iceberg is above the waterline and about 90% is below. The 5 fundamentals divide out like this. We think the first 4 are above the waterline. They're about the skills of the leader. And that 5th fundamental is below the waterline. It's the heart of the leader. And it carries about 90% of the weight. And here's the magic. And this is what a lot of leaders have not yet either accepted or understood or activated. If your heart is not right, no one cares about your skills. Now, you still need skills, right? An iceberg is both pieces. If your heart is not right, no one cares about your skills. And your listeners probably know people. They could call someone to mind who they perceive to have the skills, but they don't want to follow them. Why don't you want to follow them? You could ask 2 or 3 questions and you could get to the fact, if they're honest with you, it's because you got questions about their heart, about their motives, about are they serving or self-serving? Would they throw you under the next bus around the corner if it would serve their purposes? Are you just a piece of the machinery, a cog that can be replaced? And so I think you ultimately build followship by working on your heart as a leader. And again, there are any number of heart habits. We won't go into those right now. But let me encourage your audience. But let me say this about me and about a lot of leaders I know. This is harder than it sounds because there's something in most humans that makes us think about us.
Right.
And okay, that's, again, probably another conversation for another day. But one of the heart habits, and I would argue the first among equals, is to think others first. And again, harder to do than it is to say. So let me encourage your listeners to try something, an experiment. For 24 hours, one day. Try to add value to every person you encounter. Now, through encouragement, through resources, through compliments, you make a long list, express gratitude, correct somebody that's doing something wrong and you say, no, let me help you. This is not how we do that here.
Right.
Try that for 24 hours. Now, somebody out there is going, it's impossible to add value to everyone I meet. Okay, listen to what I'm saying. Try to. Back to my earlier comment. It's the trying that transforms. You will, because when I'm trying to add value to you, where's my focus? It's immediately on you, not me.
Right.
And so here's my hunch. If folks will try it for 24 hours, they'll sense a change in their world, in their mindset, in their life. And then I think they'll want to try it another day and another day. And what will happen over time is you will change your heart. You walk into every room differently. You stand on every stage differently. You write every email and text differently. And so that's an exercise that I've been sharing with leaders for a long time. And the testimonials are pretty powerful.
I love that. I love that. And it's so true. Reflecting on great leaders I've had in my life, and they definitely approach it in terms of serving me and helping me, not making more success for themselves.
Right.
Interesting. One of the concepts you talk about as well in this latest book is reinvent continuously. Tell me a little bit about that. Like what does that look like?
Yeah. Uncommon leaders understand that progress is always preceded by change. I meet too many leaders that think change is a burden, it's an obstacle, it's a challenge, it's a nuisance. I think they don't understand their role. Leaders are supposed to help people and organizations move from here to there, wherever there is. Your current systems, structure, beliefs, and behaviors are perfectly aligned for the outcomes you're now enjoying.
Yes.
The student who's a C student, because it's their study habits, it's their sleep habits, it's the classes they're taking. If you want different outcomes, you have to change something.
Right.
And so leaders get that. The best leaders get that. They don't think, oh my gosh, we've got to change. Okay, we get to change. Change is your job. Change in service of a preferred future. Right. Change in service of the vision or mission. It's your job. If you don't need change, you don't need leaders. You might need managers. I'm not sure what you need, but you don't need leaders.
Right.
If you're just trying to say, let's lock this thing down. So it's a big idea. And one last thought, because it's a really big idea. To help people get their head around it, we typically talk about it in 3 domains. Mm-hmm. Think about reinventing yourself. What do you need to be learning and growing? Systems and structure are the last 2. Self, systems, and structure. Systems, the work processes. Hope is not a strategy. It's a wonderful thing, but it's not a strategy. And then the structure should enable, not inhibit. And as the organization grows or attempts to grow, you will need to change your structure. A lot of leaders end up becoming a prisoner of their structure, and it's actually their structure that's impeding their growth.
I love it. I love it. And the 3 components are very enlightening too, and harken back to the leadership principles that we talked about too. Like you can't drive change without working on yourself.
For a lot of reasons, but 1, you won't be able to keep up. But 2, you won't have the moral authority to ask other people to learn and grow unless you're learning and growing.
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense. This has been a fascinating conversation on leadership and a deep dive into the pool. There's more we could go. I have one sort of more surface level question based on what we've all been talking about. And it's more about what people are thinking about right now. It's this notion of return to office versus hybrid work and the impact on leadership. Do you have the answer?
No, I do not. However, I'm in the pool with you and tried to help Chick-fil-A think through that corporately over the last several years. Yeah, again, huge question. We probably should we need another hour to talk about that. But here's my deal. I think leadership became more challenging when the world changed. But it's still our job to lead people, to, as you said earlier, inspire people, to help them do the best work of their life. And it's possible. I think it's harder. Now, 10 years from now, we won't remember what it used to be like and it'll be the new normal. But right now, I think it's harder.
Mhm.
I think it's possible. If I had a principle to share with people, here's what I think I would say. And by the way, this is the same answer I've been giving people for a long time. How do you deal with these various generations?
Mm.
Because there's a lot of difference in the generations. And I said, I think you have to treat people as individuals, not as demographic cohorts. And again, that's problematic from a leadership perspective because it's harder and there are more people. And it'd be better and easier in your mind if you could just say, here's our rule, here's our policy. Yeah. I think you've got to take it on a case-by-case basis, and you've got to figure out what different people need to excel. Now, let me quickly say, the leader is still the leader.
Right.
Do not forfeit your agency. I met with a CEO, billionaire guy, and he was lamenting. I'm really not trying to throw him under the bus, but it's a perfect example. He was lamenting the fact he needed a meeting and everybody was not in the office. And I said, you are the CEO and they do work for you. Call a meeting. So I want to be sure we don't throw up our hands and go, there's nothing we can do. No, I think it just got harder.
Right.
You're not going to bump into somebody in the hall to say, how you doing? You're going to have to call them.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to have to put it on your calendar because you still need to check in with them, but it was easier before. I think try to treat people as individuals as much as possible. And believe me, I understand the downside to that, particularly if you've got hundreds or thousands of employees. I got it.
Right.
But I think leaders have got to step up. If you don't, it's not just going to be harder, but you're going to see performance erode significantly.
Yeah. No, I agree. It has gotten harder. It's taken some of the tools away from us, but it's given us others, right? It has given us other tools in the toolkit. I'd love to switch gears. There's a series of questions I ask and everyone that comes on the show. The first of which is my favorite question. And you can probably read into why that might be. That's a whole nother conversation as we've talked about already today. But the question is, what experience of your past defines or makes up who you are today?
Almost 45 years ago, I had just moved out of the warehouse at Chick-fil-A. And my supervisor wanted to talk about my future. Now, again, I was 19, as I recall, when we had this conversation. So I was not thinking about my future. And I'm so thankful that this leader wanted to talk about my future. And he said, I need you to understand there's only one path to more influence, impact, and opportunity. And I went, say that again. He said, there's only one path to more influence, more impact, and more opportunity. And I said, what's that? And he said, lifelong learning. And I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, is that how the world works? He said, that's how the world works. And I went, really? And he said, that's it. Now, this may not be a revelation to any of your listeners, but I was an awful student. I wish my parents had that conversation with me. They wish that somebody else had that conversation with me as a student. I was an awful student. And so I made a commitment to lifelong learning about 45 years ago. And I was sharing this story with a group a while back, and somebody said, that's probably easy for you. And I said, why is that? And they said, I bet you're a learner. And they were referencing, I believe, the Strength Finder test, the 34, everybody loves to know what they're good at. And one of the 34 things that you can be good at is learning. And they said, I bet learning is in your top 5. And I said, no, it's not in my top 5. It's not in my top 10. I'm not sure it's in my top 25. They said, well, that's odd. And I said, why is it odd? And they said, well, you act like a learner. I said, thanks. I told you, I made a choice 45 years ago because I want more influence, I want more impact, and I want more opportunity. And so I'm still on that journey today. And I think that was a defining moment from a career perspective.
Yeah. No, I love that notion. And it's always interesting when you have kids. You go from thinking how things work to then watching other people try to figure it out. And I've had the blessing of I have a daughter who's now 16, but we got her involved in a school early on. I think it was kindergarten. It was project-based learning approach. And changed the whole perspective of how I thought about learning in general. When I grew up, we read a book, we recited what was in the book, but here she is, I think by first grade, she was like solving problems, like dissecting problems, understanding different options. I was like, man, I wish I had that approach to learning way back when I started learning, because I don't think I would have ever stopped. Because I think when I got to be probably 12, 13, I started to cheapen my learning process, right? Like Cliff Notes were available. For those that don't know what those are, the little pamphlets that tell you what's inside the book that you're supposed to be reading. And you start to take some little shortcuts here and there. But I think if I had learned how to learn like she did, I don't know that it definitely would have changed my outlook for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I understand that completely. We put our son in an early learning program. I think he was 3, a Montessori.
Yeah, similar.
School.
Yeah.
And he loved learning from an early age. And so I think that's one of the best things we've ever given him.
It's so nice to see the light bulb go off in their heads. So anyway, I digress. What advice would you give your younger self if you're starting this journey all over again?
We did not talk about one of the fundamentals, which is to value results and relationships. And I didn't get that until way into my career. We didn't articulate that until 25 years ago. But even after we articulated it, it was really hard for me. And I would suspect it'll be the hardest of the 5 for many of your listeners. And the reason is, I think most all of us have a natural bias. And my unofficial estimate is about 95% leaders have a bias. That 5%, I don't like them because leadership is easier for them.
Right.
But for the rest of us, we either show up and we're more about results or we're more about relationships. And the best leaders value both. It doesn't necessarily change your hardwiring or your worldview, but you learn to compensate. And I did not get that. I was clueless for way too long, maybe 2 decades. I was just about results. And then I spent the last 25 years trying to compensate so that I could value relationships as well. Because if you want to maximize performance over time, you have to value both.
Right.
To focus on results exclusively will suboptimize performance. And certainly to focus on relationships exclusively will suboptimize performance.
Right.
You got to figure out how to do both. And I wish I'd have understood that and compensated more effectively much earlier in my career.
Awesome. Is there a topic you think people need to be learning more about, or maybe something you're trying to learn more about yourself right now?
I am sensing, and this may be a blinding flash of the obvious to marketing people, but the world continues to change. Duh. I'm okay. The world continues to change. I think the way people learn is changing. We know attention spans are shorter. There's a lot of data, neuroscience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I studied, when I took over our training and development group 20 years ago or so, I studied adult learning. And some of the principles are still there, but I think it's changing. And I'm trying to figure out if I want to add value and if I want to serve, our team's trying to serve 100 million leaders in the next 7 years. Part of the way we're going to do that is to figure out how to best serve them. And I think marketers, leaders, I think humans who want to make a difference in the world, we've got to figure out. One quick sidebar, I did some videos for my team. They'd asked me to give them some videos to go on TikTok or Instagram or somewhere. And I sent them some videos and they called me back and they said, these are great. They're just way too long. They were a minute each.
Oh my Lord. Yeah.
And I'm going, this feels like a foreign language to me. How do you add value? How do you help somebody change their world in a soundbite? And that's not the whole thing, but I think people are learning differently. I think the data is beginning to support that. And I think we've got to crack that code for this next run. And I'm not assuming it'll stay where we're headed or where we are, but I'm doubling down trying to figure out how to help leaders specifically learn and apply content that'll change their life.
Love it. I got 2 questions remaining for you. Are there any trends or subcultures that you follow or you think other people should take notice of?
One of the trends is loneliness. And I think the more connected people are, the more disconnected they are becoming. And that's not just a bash on social media. That's not my point. There's a human need, I believe, in all of us to belong, to be known, to be in community. And it's evaporating. And I think we're at a macro level, we're seeing some of those consequences already in the world. And I'm not totally sure what to do about it. And there are people far smarter than me thinking about it. But I think it could change our world. And I think not in a good way.
Right.
And so I'll give you one example of something we're talking about now. I've been part of a leadership development group for 25 years. We meet twice a month, met last night, have dinner, so forth, and study the topic of leadership. Been doing that for 25 years. We're going to try to help people start those groups because we think it might not only help them with their leadership, it might help combat this epidemic of loneliness and isolationism,
right,
or whatever you want to call it, to help these folks find community and a place where they can learn and grow. So that's an idea that we're chasing right now.
I love it. I love it. A last question for you. What do you think is the largest opportunity or threat to marketers today? I know you never took that marketing job, so this might be a stretch, but...
No, I would go back to what I said earlier. I think it's the quicksand. I think you've got a lot, and I know hundreds, I may know thousands of people in the marketing world, and they're struggling. The busyness, the complexity, the distractions, the research. This was pre-pandemic, so I don't know the answer post-pandemic. We could speculate. I don't know that things are better. That if you were in an office pre-pandemic, you were interrupted on average every 3 minutes. But the psychologists tell us that it takes over 20 minutes to regain your focus and mental acuity that you had before the distraction. If you play that out, what that means is you come in the morning, when you leave, you never again regain the focus and mental acuity that you had when you walked in that door. That's quicksand.
Yes.
That's quicksand. Again, and I know people that are working outside the office that would say those distractions have gone up. Or for others, I'm sure they have gone down. But that's just an example. That's not just an issue facing leaders. I think it's facing marketers as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. Mark, this has been a fantastic conversation. So thank you for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, and stories. I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Let me do one thing for you. We did not talk about all the fundamentals. We've got a free assessment if your audience is interested. And by the way, shout out to my team. I did not do this work, but it's behaviorally based. So it's not one of those things that when you do it, you're going to say, well, that's 15 minutes of my life I'll never get back. It's not that. Based on your responses, there are behavioral recommendations for things that you can do to strengthen each fundamental. And all the audience has to do is text uncommon to 66866. Text uncommon to 66866. And I know some of your listeners are driving down the road, so please put that in the show notes, along with my cell number, which is 678-612-8441.
What were the last four again?
678-612-8441.
Awesome. We will do that. We will put this definitely in the show notes so no one swerves off the road. Please keep driving. They're in the show notes, I promise.
That's good.
But thank you again.
Oh, it's been great to see you, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me with post-production support from Sam Robertson. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe on marketingtodaypodcast.com. Tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love hearing from listeners. You can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes and links to what was discussed in the episode today, and you can search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.